Hey everyone, welcome back. This is the At the Coffee Table podcast. I'm Jason Klink, your host. This is episode 81. I love the fact that I can say it's my 81st episode. But today I have the pleasure of joining me on this podcast is Ricardo Martinez. And Ricardo is a public safety professional, and Ricardo has hosted and created Within the Trenches podcast based on the experience that he had as a 911 dispatcher. Ricardo is a former dispatcher, as I said, supervisor of 13 years in the business, and the head of Within the Trenches Media. In August of 2016, Ricardo started the hashtag I Am 911 movement that spread all across this country and abroad, including Canada, the UK, New Zealand, and Australia. Ricardo, thank you for joining me here this afternoon. I appreciate your time here.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me on. It's an honor. This is going to be fun. I'm excited.
Yes, I'm stoked to do this. I asked Ricardo to come on because he's had a lot of success with his podcast, and he organically grew his podcast from, excuse me, from the infant stages to what it is today. And if you're out there and you have considered starting a podcast, you don't really know where to begin. You're not sure where to begin. Feel free to drop a comment. Ask us any questions that you might have if you're watching this live, and we'll be happy to answer them for you. So, Ricardo, as I was kind of saying off camera, I started this podcast in the middle of the pandemic. If it wasn't for the pandemic, I might not have done it. But since we had all that extra time, I figured, well, what the heck? I'll give the podcasting thing a try. 81 episodes later, I've had some really cool guests on. I've had family and friends on. For me, it's a lot of fun. But it's a lot of fun, and with the concept of just sitting down at a coffee table or a kitchen table with a beverage and having a conversation. And so what was the major catalyst for you to start your podcast and going down that road?
To be completely honest, I mean, so everything started in dispatch, but it all started for me actually kind of struggling in dispatch. So for a long time, I hit this rut. I got burned out. I loved what I was doing. Don't get me wrong. I love the job, still do. I always will. But there was just a lot of different variables there that just had me hitting just a low spot. I mean, morale was down in the center and stuff, and I was doing a lot of overtime. I wasn't really seeing my family that much, and the types of calls that we deal with, it just really pushed me to a spot where I didn't really have anyone to talk to. So really, all of it came out of me trying to find a way, an outlet
Oh,
for these calls that I was
right.
taking, because in dispatch, and I'm sure a lot of different places too, you don't want to be the one to ask for help. You don't want to
Yeah.
look weak. You
Yeah.
don't want someone to end up saying, "Oh, Ricardo's asking for help. He can't hack it." And that was one of my big issues. And finally, I didn't care anymore because I needed to do something. So I ended up going back to school, actually, and I couldn't go to traditional college. I had to do everything online because I was working so much in dispatch. But during that time, over 3 degrees that I ended up getting, all of my major projects had to do with dispatch. So really what felt like was killing me inside, that was public safety, was actually what saved me. Public safety 911 actually saved me because of all those projects. It's where everything started. So it started out with me blogging first and writing about all of my stories, because when you're taking a phone call, you're not just taking a phone call. We are the folks who are calm, cool, and collected. However, in the back of our heads, we're freaking out with that caller too, because
Yeah.
as empaths, we're putting ourselves in their shoes to be able to relate. So those were the calls, those screams, the cries, all of that was just in my head. So writing about all of it helped. But then in my master's program for new media journalism, they introduced us to podcasting, and I fell in love with that form of storytelling. And I
Hmm.
thought, this whole time, this has been therapeutic for me to be able to share my stories. So what if I was able to get other dispatchers to come on and share their stories as well? And through the power of storytelling, we can heal together and gain some sort of closure, something that we don't ever get really in
Yeah.
911. And the podcast came to be. So it was all from me trying to, um, figure out my own stuff. and get it out there, and people really started getting into it, listening to these stories.
That's amazing that you bring it up. Just to unpack that a little bit. You and I have very similar kind of roads in down 911.
Hmm.
And, after I was probably my 15th or 16th year, I had enough, burned out, didn't want to do it anymore. Tired of the verbal abuse in the ear and just tired of the job. And that's how
Hmm.
I ended up on the vendor side of the business, on the dark side, we call it.
Yeah.
Um, and I think for some of us that, we go out there and we want to help. We want to be of service. We want to bring value. We want to still be able to help, even though we may not be doing the emergency job that we had once did. And it's finding that positive route, that positive format to get on, to be able, it could be a new business, could be a podcast, could be writing a book, whatever it might be,
Hmm.
to be able to, still kind of positively affect the world. And then you were talking about storytelling, and it hit me because there's a local guy here that has his own business, has his own marketing business, Paul Daly. This is a guy that grew his business from creation to super successful. And he has his own podcast, and he does his podcast religiously every single week.
Hmm.
And I had the opportunity early on to have a sit down conversation with him about marketing and podcasting and that. And he's talked about the same thing, storytelling. People like to hear stories, and he highly recommended Don Miller's book of building a story brand. And I read this thing cover to cover, and it was fantastic. Um, and I think there's a lot that goes into not only our personal stories, but everybody's story, and sharing that information. And do you feel like that was really what helped you grow and grow your following, scale the podcast as you went along?
Yeah, it was all about making it personal, really opening up and being, vulnerable, letting people know how everything is working out. So, and from the time that I started the podcast, well, actually the blog first and then the podcast, I've gone around to different conferences, public safety conferences, and have continued that, sharing not only my story but having others share theirs. And that is exactly how I was able to connect with so many people. It was just that power of storytelling. Because it's one thing to say, I took this one phone call and, give a couple details and that be it. But to go in and actually share what it was actually like, not just the phone call, but what it was like for you, that when you're driving home and you've got 45 minutes by yourself and you don't even turn the radio on because you had 12 hours of hell, that just that alone gets people like, okay, what else? I want to hear more. Like, what else does this person have to say?
Dude,
How did
you,
how did they
you just
deal
gave me
with it?
chills. You just gave me chills.
It's just that, it's that, letting people know that, I wasn't okay. I was
Yeah,
not okay after that call. It
yeah,
bothered me, and for 45 minutes driving home, I was playing it back in my head, because when you're taking these phone calls also, and it, as and you piece everything together like a puzzle in your head. You're
yeah,
not seeing it. And
yeah.
sometimes it's worse in your brain than what is actually going on there.
Oh, for sure.
So when you're talking about podcasting and storytelling, those are the pieces that you add in there.
Yeah,
And because that's what happened. And for me, it was fully therapeutic to be able to do it. It's that first step into my own healing, was opening that door. And, if I cried, it was fine, because I needed to get it out. And other people seeing that or even hearing it on the podcast,
yeah.
it helped them as well. And that's how it continued to grow, was just through that power of storytelling.
That's phenomenal. And I got to tell you, there's quite a few times at 23:10, I was driving home in the silence because I just wanted to hear the silence and nothing else.
Hmm.
And it's just, yeah, that's very real. So you've probably done what, hundreds of, do you even know how many episodes you've done?
If so, just talking about the flagship show, what
Yeah.
the podcast that I started out with the Trenches podcast, I am going to be posting or publishing in a couple days episode 436.
Outstanding. So you 436 of Within the Trenches. I was just had the opportunity to be on your 98th episode of the Directors Roundtable.
Yeah,
Your,
yeah.
your podcast has really kind of morphed into other things, and I've had the opportunity to do that with my own, where I created a roundtable with some friends of mine that we
Mhm.
just talk about social issues or personal development, whatever it might be. But it was an opportunity to get three other people on and have a conversation. Have you ever done a really kind of, I mean, I guess Dispatchers Roundtable is really probably the biggest group. Do you do more than two or three? I mean, how big has that gotten?
Yeah, so I do the Dispatchers Roundtable, but I also do a live broadcast every Thursday on social media that's called Open Mic Live.
That's right.
So for that one, dispatchers come on in the audience and they share all of their funny stories. But the way that one actually started out, it was at the I'm pretty sure it was at the beginning of the pandemic, either the beginning of the pandemic or it was the beginning of the a lot of the social unrest that was going on, a lot of the protests that were going on. And
Mhm.
actually I think a lot of that was around the same time.
Yeah.
So I remember being on social media and seeing tons of friends sharing posts, not only just theirs but others, on how they were feeling, and people were not feeling that well.
Right.
And around 2017 I started going around different public safety conferences and doing this with a live audience. It's called Imagine Listening, where the first part of it is just dispatchers sharing kind of their harder 911 calls, how it was like for them when they took that call. And really, it was a peer support session. But I didn't want people to leave feeling, just kind of like, oh, So
Yeah.
the last 30 minutes of it was open mic, where we would share the lighter side of dispatch. And so you start out emotionally intense, and it wasn't always, a lot of the hard calls. Might be a save as well that people would share. But
Yeah.
then the last half, we would share all the funny stuff that happened in 911, whether it be a funny incident that happened with the
Mhm.
person telling the story and their coworkers, or a phone call that came in. So I had been doing that for a while already. So one night, I think it was 11:30 at night, and I was awake because I worked midnight shift all the time. So it has stuck with me since then that I stay up real late. But I went on around 11:30 at night, and I just went live on all of my social media accounts, and I just started sharing my funny 911 stories. And I said, I feel like people need to laugh, and
Yeah.
let's see. So that's where it started for that one. And so every Thursday I come on and I ask people on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling this week? How are you doing? Any number under a five, I tell them, hopefully by the end of this session, sharing funny stories, your number will go up. So I check with people in the beginning and then check with them at the end. But that's how it started. That's how open mic started, to do it live like that, as a live broadcast on social media. It was just checking in with people.
Yeah.
And then sharing funny stories, and people come on and share all kinds. My mom sometimes jumps in there, which makes it even more funny, because then people start sharing like some of the more crazy, sometimes raunchy 911 calls, because they want to see if I will say it while my mom is in the audience.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. But that's how it's been scaling from there, is just kind of evolving, not just from the main podcast, but doing live broadcasts and just sharing all different types of stories, whether they be funny ones or harder ones, but also like the Dispatchers Roundtable, talking about different just topics in
Yeah.
911 as well as technology.
Do you think the key to your success is really how you niche down in the 911 industry? It's always been about 911. For the most part, it's that drilled down niche has just been why it really kind of exploded like it has.
Hmm. I think for me, it was just sticking to me being me. So
Okay.
there's a quote that I was introduced to, and it's by Simon Sinek, and hopefully I don't mess it
Mhm.
up. But the quote is basically, people don't buy what you do; they buy why you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always
Yes.
been, for me, about giving back to dispatch, because I don't want anyone to have to deal with some of the stuff that I dealt with, where I was afraid to share my story, where I was afraid to ask for help.
Hmm.
So if I can help others through the power of storytelling, then that's what it's always been. And sticking to what I've done and having that passion and just getting out there and giving a voice to where some, might not have a voice or feel that they
Yes.
have a voice, has kept it going. I've had, just like this opportunity to be on your podcast. I've been a guest on others, and that actually pushed it as well. So not only public safety, but a large chunk of the general public listens as well, and they'll
Hmm.
send in stories of their own on how dispatchers help them, or they'll say, thank you for having this, because now I understand more that when I call 911 and someone puts me on hold, it's not because they don't care. It's because my emergency isn't the only emergency that's going on. So I guess in a
Right.
sense,
Right.
that niche of being in public safety, yes, but really it's just been, me being kind of a 911 nerd and, and really just sticking to, what it was that I've always done. And it's been
Yeah.
storytelling, but also giving back to dispatch as much as possible.
Now, seeing that you take it on the road, so to say, and you
Mhm.
go to the conferences and so on, what was it like getting more and more recognized? You get more and more recognitions. You're having more and more conversations. Hey, I heard it. I saw it. It was great. Blah blah blah. It affected me this way. That had been pretty profound when you started getting more and more of that, right?
Yeah, it was, I'll put it this way. It was nothing that I ever expected. When I first started doing this, it started with me telling my assistant director, my deputy director at the dispatch center I was at, the last one I was at, that I was going to start writing about these calls.
Mm-hmm.
And I was told, no, don't do that because we're going to get sued. And and I said, well, there's there was something that you guys told us that I want to remind you, you guys had said that you can't regulate our feelings online, and I'm just sharing my story. I'm not sharing anything. But, she ended up saying, "Yeah, you're right. We can't regulate your feelings online." So I was like, "Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and do this." And it just continued, from there. But
Mm-hmm.
it's nothing that I ever expected. So when things started to build up, and I ended up having a local ABC affiliate came to the dispatch center and did a story on the podcast that I had started. And one of the local newspapers had put something out there as well. Again, not something I ever expected. It was cool,
Yeah.
but it never got to me like, oh yeah, like this is awesome. I mean, like, like I'm all this, big whatever. I
Yeah.
just thought that I'm glad that people are recognizing it, and I'm going to keep pushing and keep doing what I'm doing, because I'm not going to just settle. Like, my whole goal was to somehow play some small part in public safety to make some sort of impact or change. And that's just what I keep trying to do, and just
Yeah.
evolve and
Yeah.
evolve. But yeah, it was a little weird in the beginning, like, oh, you know who I am? Like, oh, that's cool. Like, how can we work together? And then a lot of different things just started to build up from there with partnerships and such.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny because I was just thinking how I think I knew you or knew of you before you even knew who I was until we got kind of introduced through Carbine.
Right.
But in my former employer, I had seen you at a couple of trade shows before the trade shows ended with the pandemic. But I had seen you at a couple of trade shows doing your thing, working your podcast, which is just so super cool. Um, with Now your podcast has sponsors, and you don't have to get too deep into this,
Hmm.
but some podcasts have sponsors. Yours have sponsors. I've listened to some other ones. I've listened to some podcasts that went from having no sponsors, all of a sudden now we're throwing in commercials and sponsors and
Yeah.
whatever throwouts. Is the sponsorship thing something that comes to you, or is that something you go seek out for?
So in the beginning, when I first started doing this, so all of this started as a college project. It
Right.
was it was a graphic design that I was doing, and it just started out as a video sharing stories, and then it just continued to build. That was in 2010. So
Hmm.
that was the very first version of what it is that I do now. The podcast actually started as a Kickstarter campaign, crowdfunding, at the end of 2012, going into 2013, and I was picking up a lot of steam. A lot of people were learning, and just listening and listening. And by episode 5, one of my coworkers, who I was their supervisor, people had listened to us and said she should be your co-host. So I brought her on as the co-host. We ended up doing, I think, up to episode 43, and then I moved to Indiana, and she is now the deputy director at the old center that I worked at. So
Outstanding.
yeah, we ended up going our separate ways, but we're still cool. I still bring her on every now and then as a guest host, and she will
Yeah.
always be, my co-host and stuff. It's always fun. But um I went seeking out sponsorship to see if this is something that I could do on my own. And one of the things, for those who are watching, because I see your question on here as well, one of the things to remember is to try not to pay attention to the numbers when you're like downloads, listens, all of that other stuff, because that'll end up tearing you apart.
Yeah.
If because that's in the beginning, you might feel like, oh, this is the greatest idea, everyone's going to listen, everyone is going to want to hear this and that. But then when you see that people really aren't listening, that brings you down. Don't let
Yeah.
it get you down,
Yeah.
because I was there and I let it get me down for a little while, and then I just kept pushing and pushing and
Yeah.
pushing. But it's hard in the beginning. You go looking for sponsorships and people are like, yeah, we'll wait till your numbers get a little higher, and that's another thing. Make sure you have numbers. You've got the that information, rather. You've got those analytics to be able to give to those potential sponsors, because that's what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And they're looking for that, but not just the content. The content can be amazing, but if you don't have anybody listening, then they won't jump on. So in the beginning, I sought out the sponsorships, and there was nothing coming in. Luckily, the company that I was working for, who actually found me through the podcast, because I went to the dark side as well there for like 7.5 years.
Yeah.
That company, they supported me throughout that whole time. And I continued to do it. I worked for them full time. I became their communications director. But I continued doing the podcast consistently.
Mhm.
And after that first initial, I guess, seeking sponsors, I ended up not looking after that, because it started to kind of take over a little bit, only in the sense that that was almost like a goal. It was on my list of things to do, was to get sponsors. And then I was doing everything consistently, every episode, but that was still there and it was eating at me a little bit. And I thought, I'm gonna drop this idea. I'm not gonna go for sponsors anymore. I'm just gonna continue doing what I've always been doing. And
Yeah.
if something happens, awesome. If not, I'm still going to continue doing, because that's what I wanted to do, is be able to give back and share these powerful stories.
Yeah.
Once I started doing that and just sharing and sharing, going to conferences, doing sessions, and doing podcast episodes there with attendees and sharing more stories, then the sponsors started, actually, people were reaching out to me to say, hey, let's partner up, let's do something. And it started out small and then just continued and continued.
Hmm.
But in the beginning, I sought out the sponsors, didn't work, and I just decided I'm not even going to think about it anymore. I'm just going to continue doing what I'm doing and leave it at that. And then, things changed. After that, things changed.
It's so two things that I really picked out of there too was one
Hmm.
about the analytics, paying attention to the analytics, and I got to be honest, it's I'll put out my podcast and I may look at the analytics initially,
Hmm.
but after a day or two, it's gone. Whatever happened happened, and I'm not paying attention to the numbers after that because I'm already looking for the next guest, the next topic, and so on. And then, you talked about how you just went out there and kept making content and making the podcast and going to the shows and doing the hard work.
Hmm.
And I think in any venture, business venture, podcast, whatever it might be, you have to put in the work. Because if you don't put in the work, it's just, and once you just, it really sounds like once you just kind of let it free flow and you just kept doing your thing and doing your thing, you let the sponsors come as they may, or if they didn't, oh well, you just kept putting out your content. And I think
Hmm.
there's a lot to be said about, you know, don't worry about the analytics, put in the hard work, keep putting it out, keep being consistent. Because I mean, I'm sure you can agree, the podcast world is very polluted, not polluted, but crowded is the better word.
Yeah.
And we're trying to get ahead of some really big influencers that are out there, because all the influencers have podcasts. I'm trying to get past them in order to gain some kind of foothold in this business.
Yeah, there's many out there, and when when thinking about it, like there have been a couple times where I've seen, a few let's just say like talk show hosts or actors and stuff, and they're like, "We're starting a podcast." I'm like, "Oh, awesome."
Another
There's
one to add to the list.
yeah, there's one more there that that you have to go up against and stuff. But the thing is there's a lot of them that are like that. They're still just sharing stories and everything,
Yeah,
and I like hearing those types of stories as well, because I like to learn more about people in general. I love learning about their background stories. How did you
right.
get to here? How did you do this? How do you do that? But for me, I always just look at these dispatchers and call takers that are doing what they're doing,
Yeah,
and they don't always get that recognition, and
no,
bringing them on and sharing those stories and learning where they come from. A couple of them, they were kids answering the radio at their house because they started, their dad or their mom or whatever was an officer, and this was
yeah,
way back in the day, and they were dispatching. The dispatching was happening out of their own home, and they remember being a kid listening to this stuff and telling these stories. Like, that's fascinating. Like, that's craziness. So
yeah,
yeah, it's definitely vast. There are a lot of people out there that are doing this, but I think that if you, like we were saying, if you put in the work and just push out all of the other stuff that is going on, and really let your passion flow with everything that you're doing, with your niche or whatever topic it is that you're concentrating on, people are going to take notice,
yeah,
because what it's going to be is they're going to hear it in your voice. They're going to see it in your eyes if we're, doing like this on camera. But if it's just audio, of course, they're going to hear it in your voice.
yeah,
They're going to believe it because you believe it.
yeah,
And that's how you're putting it out there. And they're going to want to hear more.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And realistically, what I found out too is it doesn't take a whole lot to do a podcast. You can do it on a laptop with earbuds,
Yep.
and that's really how I started. My first 10 episodes I think it was my laptop and earbuds. And then you learn about you get mics and headsets or speakers or whatever you need, and you kind of evolve it from there to evolve to like you got with the soundboard and all that. But which just adds, I think that adds to the entertainment value of it. It adds
Mhm.
to the storytelling. And the more you can add, you don't want to drown it in extra stuff, but
Right.
the stuff that you can kind of filter in and so on, I think adds to the entertainment value, which people want to be, they want to hear storytelling, but they want to be entertained. They want to relate. And so I'm assuming that you really kind of evolved from something simple to what you're doing now.
Yeah, so you mentioned the laptop and earbuds. I had something similar, but I also, and I don't even remember where I bought this from now, but it was basically, it was like a big speaker. It was
Hmm.
one speaker and it had two XLR ports in it. So I you put in the microphones and you can talk on it, but you can transfer it to the laptop to record. So it was also an audio interface.
Oh, okay.
So, like, if we were doing something live, we would have the speaker to be able to put all the audio out to the audience, but also at the same time record it into the laptop. But in those first couple episodes, there was no audience or anything. We were in the quiet room of the dispatch center recording, and everything was going into the laptop. The bad part, though, was that it wasn't stereo. It was only mono. So you can hear
Uh,
you can hear me out of one ear and my guest out of the other ear. And at that time, I'm still learning these, how to use the software and everything. So I didn't have it as stereo going out. So, like, I think it's episode one, the first three episodes, either three or four episodes, they're in mono. And it's funny because, so, like, with some of the hosting platforms, when people go in to give you reviews, you can't respond to them. The review is there
right,
forever. So
right.
there's a few of them there saying, "Oh, the topics are cool and the stories were cool, but this is in mono." And I remember when I read it, I was like yelling at my laptop, not yelling angrily or anything, but just jokingly saying, "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I know it's in mono. I can't change it now." I mean, I could probably go back and put it in stereo and, enhance all of it now that I have all the knowledge that to do all of that. But in the beginning, man, that's how it was in the beginning. And thank you, all of you who have listened, who have stuck with me, because I do tell people, if you start at the beginning, I promise you, the audio gets better.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
And it's funny because we have this technology and we're able to do this, but sometimes technology is not our friend. And I was
right.
doing one of my roundtable podcasts, and my internet it blinked out. It just
Oh,
glitched bad. And where it locked up to the point where I couldn't do anything. So my
mhm.
guests were talking to each other, but I was frozen. I was frozen on my side. I couldn't do anything with it. And I had to go and completely go out of the StreamYard platform, hoping that I could get back into where I left off. Luckily, I get back in, and my guests, they're all still talking. They're like, "Oh, we just covered for you because we figured you'd be back eventually." And I was just like, I couldn't believe this was happening. It was live, but it's just one of those things you just gotta kind of you learn and you go through and you try to adapt as you go along. And I mean, I even had times where I thought I was talking into this, but I didn't
Uh-huh.
realize it went to the earbuds I had in my ears. So now you just hear a bunch of echo and not out of the mic. And learning curves. It's all learning curves.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of that happens. You have to think on the fly. You have to keep your your just think on your feet. You know,
Yeah.
knees loose and everything, and whatever happens, always, if you can, always have a backup, because there were a couple times where I recorded, and I think at that time I was using maybe like Skype or something, but I was recording, and I usually recorded through that audio, but also onto like Adobe Audition or something, and I had a backup. And for whatever reason, 2 episodes that I recorded that day, back to back, gone. They were
Oh,
gone. And I'm looking all over my laptop, can't find it anywhere. I ended up trying to get like some recovery software to see if I could recover it.
yeah.
Didn't work. So I had to get both of those guests and tell them, yeah, we got to do this over. And we did it again. And actually, the episodes the second time ended up being way better than they were the first time.
Oh, that's
So luckily that it worked out that way. But man, if you can, try to always have a backup,
and
because
I just learned something new. Get a backup because I've yet to do that too.
yes.
Uh, that's awesome. So where's your podcast journey heading? What's on the horizon for you that you can divulge?
So, there's always so many different things that are going on. This with just like during the pandemic, there were a lot of different things that I was trying to figure out what to do. The podcast kept going. Still had a lot of people that were coming on, and still do. But then those live broadcasts started coming in as well, so it evolved to that too. Added also Patreon, because then during that time I had a lot more time to create more content,
Yeah.
and so there was more bonus episodes that were going out there. And on top of that, I started doing virtual events as well,
Hmm.
um, through a platform that I've been using that was actually connected to Patreon. The funny thing is that it was on the back burner for so long, of just simply looking at and trying out this platform. It's called Crowdcast,
Hmm.
and I'd been looking at it, and then I finally thought, I'm gonna finally look at it to see what I can do with it. And going into it, I ended up creating a virtual event for public safety, because a lot of conferences were being canceled,
Oh
postponed,
yeah.
all that good stuff. All the training was going out the window. So
Yep.
I thought, well, let's try to mimic it and do it virtually. So based around the podcast, I started within the trenches media. So the media company, I put all of my skills to use,
Hmm.
because I have degrees in web development, graphic design, and then journalism, and then my 9-1 background. And I always told people, if I could find some sort of job that combined all of that, it'd be gold. Like
Right.
for me
Perfect storm.
personally, it would be golden. Like that's exactly what I want to do.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be that way. So from the podcast, everything evolved into what it is that I'm doing now with these virtual events. And the podcast continues. I've got all of these episodes that are coming up that I have kind of in the can, so to speak. And it just continues on, man, with the podcast, but all the storytelling. And
Yeah.
then the appearances at conferences, but also in the back there, I screen print and do all of my podcasting merchandise. So
Get the
the,
merch.
yeah, some of the websites that I had gone to where, it says, no upfront costs or anything like that. I thought, oh, cool. I'm gonna go ahead and try that. But the quality that was coming back was not that great.
Yeah.
And since I am a graphic designer as well, I thought, hey, why not learn something new? So during that time as well, as everyone else is learning something new, I taught myself how to screen print.
Yeah.
So I've been doing that as well. So it just continues to evolve, man. It's been really good.
Now you just shared a story today about a really cool opportunity you had to kind of audition or participate in a TV show. Am I correct?
Yes, yeah. There
Yeah.
there was that's another thing, that has come from this, from the podcast and storytelling, is that people have been looking up different stories and stuff, and I guess the podcast popped up, and some of the live events that I do, as well as the IM91 movement, sharing more and more dispatch stories. And there's a show that's actually going to be coming out this Wednesday. It's called So Dumb It's Criminal, and the host is Snoop Dogg.
Snoop
And
Dogg.
yeah, and this last summer I was at a conference, and I ended up getting an email from someone who said they looked up and knew about a lot of the stories that I had been sharing, and the podcast and live broadcasts, and they wanted me to go and share these stories for the show. So I flew out there and had that opportunity again, something that I never thought I would have the opportunity to do. But I went there and I shared some personal stories, but also a lot of funny ones.
That's
So yeah, that and of course it's 420 is when it airs. So what other date for Snoop would that be?
awesome. You're
would
right.
that be good?
Here,
So yeah, opportunities like that have happened, and I don't believe my stuff made the cutting room floor,
here.
but it was still an amazing experience, and just to know that the folks there knew a lot about the stories, not just mine, but from dispatchers and call takers all over the world who have been sharing stories.
Yeah,
That's what it's all about. And that's what I love. It's been a great experience.
that's phenomenal. That's fantastic. So one last question.
Mhm.
And what is your biggest piece of advice to anybody looking to, start a podcast or get into podcasting?
So there's a couple things actually. And to just start out with, just be you.
Mm,
Whatever it is that you're looking to get into, just be you. I had the opportunity a few months back to talk to a bunch of college students
no,
who were looking at getting into technology or creating content or anything like that, and people were saying that there were things that they were really interested in, but they didn't know how they were going to do it. But after I told them, kind of how I did it, they changed their mindset. So maybe those who are watching this and listening can do the same thing, where you might have something that you're really, really interested in, but something that you do now, something that you're really good at, something that you love, that is what you should be talking about,
yeah,
because you will have the confidence to be able to get it out there and also share some tips and tricks or whatever it is that you're talking about. That is what people want to listen to.
yeah,
They want to listen to you and your story or other people's stories, but put all of you into it, because if you're just going half, that's what you're going to get in return as
yes, you're gonna
well.
get back. Yep,
Yeah,
100%.
it's all in what you put into it, but also be consistent, because if you haven't heard the term pod fade, it's real.
Hmm.
And in what that basically is you can be consistent. Your fan base will get into it and be like, yep, I know that so and so is going to put out an episode every Wednesday at this time. And then if you end up slacking on it and it goes every other week when it was originally a weekly episode that you're putting out there, then people start to lose interest. And
Yep,
there's that starts to fade away, because the less you are putting into it, the less they're going to care about it.
sure,
So it's a hard thing, man. It
for
you
sure.
have to be 100% into it to have all these episodes going out, because it's not always an easy thing.
Yeah, for sure. It's so hard. It's just you know, if, like on my end of things, I could come on here and rattle on and babble on about a topic, and that's just me giving my opinion. That's fine.
Mhm.
But the even harder part is, going out and finding interesting guests to come on and to talk
Yes.
about different things and make sure it aligns with the podcast. That's really where a lot of, you get some folks that'll say, oh yeah, sure, I'll do it. And then never hear from them again.
Right.
And then there's been a couple of podcasts where it didn't go so well. And I kind of went, ugh. So we got to, that kind of thing. But yeah, you're right. There's nothing short of being passionate about something, being you, and just being genuine and sharing that with maybe sharing that with a guest or on your own.
Right. And don't be afraid of long form episodes either. There's been a lot of times where I've spoken to folks and they've done episodes where we're recording for almost an hour and then it goes down to like 10 minutes. Because people are afraid that they might not tune in for that long. And I've always done episodes long form and I've found that people open up a lot more when you're talking longer, and when it's just
Sure.
like this, the way you and I have been doing this, just a regular conversation.
Yep.
And people get comfortable. Sometimes in the beginning, if I know someone is nervous, I'll start singing or dancing with them or joking around or whatever, so to kind of loosen them up. So there's one more tip there for if you've got a guest that you have coming on, it's a little nervous, they're not sure what to do, especially if it's on video too, not just audio, because a lot of people shy away from it. But just be you, have
Yeah.
fun with it, and
Yeah.
they'll have fun with it as well.
Oh yeah. 100%. 100%. Well, with that, I think that's a great place to end for today. Ricardo, I appreciate your time. What is the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can get a hold of me on my website. It is withinthetrenches.net. But also, if you do withinthetrenches.net/bizcard, and that's BIZCARD, that'll take you to a spot where I designed out everywhere that you can find me, whether it be the podcast, the live broadcasts, all of that information is all right there, because I would forget my business cards. So I just designed something up and did a QR code, and now at conferences I just show it to them and they have it all right there. So
There you go.
withinthetrenches.net or withinthetrenches.net/bizcard, and you'll find everything.
Yes. Connect with Ricardo. He does have a great presence on social media, so feel free to reach out to him. Go and check out Within the Trenches, especially if you're in public safety. You're going to love it. It's a great podcast. And feel free to drop a comment. Send us a comment on this show if you're watching it later on, and let us know what you think. And if you have any questions regarding starting a podcast or creating your own podcast, feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to talk to you. Ricardo, thank you again. I appreciate your time. It was great to have you on here. Great conversation.
Thank you, man. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. For everybody else, thank you for joining. Again, like, comment, and share. I'd love to hear it. And with that, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and have a great day.